Naming conventions are a set of rules that define how do we name various code elements such as classes, methods, variables, constants, and more. The role of naming conventions is to make our code more readable and easy to understand. When we agree on a convention, every code segment becomes clearer, with the various elements easily distinguished from the others. Note that naming conventions are not enforced by compilers, and the code will work perfectly without using any convention, but a code without conventions will be messy and hard to work with. Naming conventions usually deal with two types of rules. One, structure of the name, casing, underscores, etc. And content of the name, what kind of words can be used in the name. There are many types of code conventions, and I'll cover here the most common ones. First, let's talk about camel case. The camel case notation basically states that if a name contains more than one word, then the first letter of the second word onward should be capitalized. For example, if a class is named car engine, in camel case it will look like this. There are two variants of camel case, upper camel case and lower camel case. The difference between them is the casing of the first letter of the first word. As you can guess, with upper camel case it will be capitalized, while in lower camel case it will not. The camel case convention is very popular in Java, C#, JavaScript, and Swift, and is also recommended for class names in Python and Ruby. Next is the lowercase separated by underscores convention. As its name implies, in this convention, the name contains only lowercase letters and the words are separated by an underscore. For example, a variable named num of parts will look like this. This convention is mainly used in Python and Ruby for naming variables. Another similar convention is capitalized with underscores. The difference between this one and the lowercase separated by underscores is that while in the former we use only lowercase letters, in the latter we use only capitalized letter. For example, the variable days in week will look like this in the capitalized with underscores. This convention is often used in Java, Python, and Ruby for naming constants. The last convention we will talk about is a Hungarian notation. The Hungarian notation was very popular in the 90s, and there are some developers still using it today. The Hungarian notation basically states that the type information should be part of the name of the variable. For example, if you have a variable of type string that contains a first name, the variable name will look like this. As you can see, the name has a prefix that represents the type name. It's not the full type name, but a short version of it. Usually, an abbreviation of 3 letters is used. Again, this is not a widely used notation and should generally be avoided. The second part of the naming convention deals with the content of the name, and there is an important distinction to make here. As a rule of thumb, class names should always be nouns and method names should always be imperative verbs. For example, a class that handles data retrieval should be called data retriever or simply data, and a method in this class that actually retrieves the data will be called retrieve data. The reason for this is that a class should always represent an entity, which is described as noun, while a method should represent an action on this entity and should be named accordingly. So, to summarize this lecture, always work with a specific naming convention. It doesn't really matter which convention you will work with, although it's a good idea to stick to a common standard, but make sure to make this decision as soon as possible, and even more important, always follow the convention. You will see the code will be much more readable and easy to understand.